Would you believe me if I told you that the one thing Ender's Game, Mobile Suit Gundam December Sky, and Neon Genesis Evangelion all had in common was the psychological trauma and manipulation of their main characters? If you're unfamiliar, these movies can be stripped down to a simple description. A young boy stands in his bedroom. Though a war has been waging since before his birth, today is the day he will be conscripted to fight. Today, he has been deemed special by his superiors, who will weaponize his fears, past, and choices for the greater good. Who does he fight? Ender fights the buggers. Shinji fights the angels. Io fights other humans. Throughout all these movies, the needs of the adults are always put first. One of the most sobering moments in Ender's Game comes when Ender kills Bonzo, a classmate of his, in self-defense. As Ender grapples with the reality of what he's done, the adults quickly swoop in and make everything disappear. Ender doesn't find out if Bonzo recovers. Even if he already knows that he is dead, the adults never tell him. He's their greatest weapon, after all. And what's one kid's trauma when there's a war? Io Fleming, the star pilot of the most advanced Gundam frame the war has ever seen, sits in the cockpit as his comrades are murdered around him. He can hear their screaming over the comms and over the jazz that he likes to listen to when he flies. He can see their frames being knocked back by blasts. Occasionally, he can even see their mutilated bodies. Io Fleming is routinely the only person to make it back from his expedition, and every time he makes it back, he's sent back out with a new batch of teenagers who don't know what they've signed up for. Shinji Ikari sits in his Eva after his first battle. Scared, horrified, and traumatized, he is told to get over it, that there are 1,000 more battles to fight, and in that moment he will realize that his initial reluctance to pilot the Eva was more justified than he would have ever assumed. He is only a child, yes, but he is also the only one who can pilot the Eva, the adults will reason. Sure, he's only a boy, but he's the greatest weapon ever made and fighting for humanity. So who cares if he's scared? Who cares about what he sees when he's fighting the angels? He's a tool, and he should be used like one. Children that are not given a way to express their feelings will always repress them. And while this suppression may work in the short term, it is rather ineffective. A person might not remember their anger, helplessness, anxiety, or pain, but they will express those emotions in destructive acts directed at themselves or to others. Ender is fundamentally changed by his time at battle school. His original hopeful and funny personality slowly icing over as he is isolated from his friends and his family. He becomes increasingly aware of the weight of his actions, leading him to question his identity and morality as he becomes more drawn into the war. He represses his emotions, as he's done since he was a child, and these suppressed emotions make him lash out at people he cares about. Io too has been shaped by his trauma, from finding his father after his grisly suicide to seeing his squad mates die in front of him countless times. Though he presents himself as cheery and easygoing, he's plagued by nightmares and flashbacks from constant exposure to violence and loss. As the war wages on with him at the center, he detaches himself from reality. He stops seeing his enemies as humans to cope with the burden of their death and better justify his own actions of violence and the joy he takes in committing them. Where he was once a soldier that was happy to fight on the front lines, he is now transformed into a veteran who will do anything and kill anyone if it means the war will finally end. Shinji struggles with his feelings of inadequacy and fear of rejection throughout the series. Unlike Io and Ender though, he does not detach from what is happening around him. Unable to keep his feelings from controlling him and his actions, he winds up hurting those around him much more than he ends up helping them. Shinji is either constantly vying for the approval and affection of his father, his superiors at Nerve, and his fellow pilots, or he is neck deep in a despair-induced mental breakdown. As the series progresses, Shinji is forced to confront his own fears. This confrontation forces him to change. For better or for worse, these battles become a metaphor of Shinji fighting his own inner demons and also the failure to safeguard these children from the horrors of war. These worlds normalize violence, especially violence committed against children. They condition them to accept warfare as an inevitable reality. War is no longer a horrific external force that is seen in the media or heard over the radios. War is simply just another Tuesday. In Ender's Game, the military controls every aspect of family life. They isolate promising young geniuses classes in battle school, a place that is designed to isolate these children and foster abilities that can be useful in the war. They repeatedly expose these children to battle and horrors beyond those that a child should see, with the sole purpose of desensitizing them. In December Sky, soldiers are no longer human. They become statistics. Violence here is endless, and it is everywhere. It is seen in the never-ending ships of new recruits. In this place, death is always around the corner, and no one is safe from it. Characters are trapped here. They are unable to leave. They are entangled at the heart of a system that glorifies atrocities. The cycle never ends. The world of Evangelion is steeped in a now familiar dread. Where it differs from the other two, though, is that its setting is apocalyptic. There is only a looming dread that hangs over Tokyo 3, as its citizens are constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. The show uses this dread quite effectively, preferring to lean into environmental storytelling, showing its characters' internal thoughts as external visuals, often juxtaposing chaotic and beautifully choreographed battle scenes with surreal, introspective, sometimes messy, but equally as mesmerizing abstract sequences to amplify the emotional weight and depicts Shinji's own internal trauma and emotional distress as both his own personal struggle and a collective burden between him and the audience. I hope that by now you can see that these movies, while being fundamentally very different, are not all that dissimilar, especially when you're looking at it through the lens of abuse and through trauma. And the one final place where this is really driven home is in the endings of all three films. In December Sky, after Io is rescued from the enemy ship where he has been tortured and held for hours or maybe even days, he continues to fight. In Ender's Game, after he realizes that he has been tricked by his superiors during his final simulation, that every single battle in command school has been a real battle. It has never been a simulation. That he's been killing actual people and he's been killing actual aliens. Ender faces a crisis of conscience and identity. Despite his commander's attempts to soothe him and his conscience, he eventually leaves and goes to explore the stars with his sister. And finally, in Evangelion, when Shinji realizes that instrumentality, the melding of all human consciousness so that there is no longer pain and only happiness, but no individual identity, is not the only way to find happiness. He chooses to reject instrumentality, and he chooses to continue to live with his own pain and trauma, alone, but his own person. None of these characters are ever allowed closure. Their life simply goes on. Their war is won, their battle is over, their commanders have been given justification for their controversial use of children in war. These once innocent children are now forever changed by trauma. And with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching, or, as I suspect most of you are doing, for listening.